Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning wherever you're watching this. Ultimately, this was very difficult to ultimately do. I didn't have the best night's sleep, so it proves it was going to be a very difficult thing to talk about of this thing that's affected me. And I wanted to bring it to the table, and ultimately, you guys could get to know me a little bit deeper. And the one ultimately that I've gone to decide to go with is more to around my upbringing and being brought up by a single parent, being my mother, and thus, as most people know, be it, well, the picture behind me, I'm in a wheelchair. I was born with a disability, and we were chatting as a family, as we do, as my mum and I do, periodically. To do this story, and it doesn't step on too many toes, which is not too bad. But with that said, I think when you're born into my circumstances, and I'm not saying they're any better or any worse than anybody else's, far from that, but I think being born with a disability, be congenital and for that matter, and coming into a single parent household, the stereotype of this the parents, well, the single parent is, low income, irresponsible, and things like that. And you could say that to an extreme with somebody that's got a disability, because I've talked about this before, about being as a toddler. I've got no recollection of this, but being told that what you've done to your son, and that's probably very emotionally heartfelt for my mum to have to deal with that, because mentally, I think we are our own worst critics, and to have somebody else trying to use the words that would be correct, kind of almost vilify you even more to a more extreme, to ultimately, why would you deface a body part of somebody that you love? You wouldn't do it. But I think because of some of the mindset and resiliency that I've been brought up in and brought into, kind of the narrative that I use to this day, probably stems back from my early childhood. My mum said to me, my grandmother, and I've not heard this ever, so it shows that kind of the mask that even family can put up to you to kind of protect you, of she kind of went in meltdown. It's like, oh, he's going to be living in a wheelchair. How is he going to be able to fend for himself? I've not heard this in 30 years, and my grandmother's unfortunately no longer with us, so I couldn't ask her why. But being also told by the radiographer when I was born, the amount of bones that he's missing, not going to be able to walk. I was told that as a 15, probably like, I'll say 15, maybe a little bit younger, as a teenager. So I get to a certain age, I've thrown caution to the wind, and ultimately hit the ground running. Okay, should I not be able to walk? Should I be in a wheelchair? Possibly, or probably. But you can see how strong the mind is when you put it in a positive perspective of, looking at the guiding light, the light at the end of the tunnel, and pushing forward regardless of what other people say. And I think with that said, when it comes to me being a coach now, it's trying to instill people with that belief, because it comes down to these three elemental factors of, the narrative of the story that you're telling yourself, the facts of that, and then the effects. The story that I would tell myself related to my mother being an only child, me being an only child, my mother being a single parent. If you look at the narrative as an adult now, it's looked down upon. People are, for whatever reason, the choices that they made to have a child, people are going to look at them, well, you made the wrong decisions by X, Y, Z. Me having a disability on top of that, would my mum be looked down upon a little bit in other social circles? Probably, because being a single parent, you can't go out and socialize with families that are married because of the assumption that you're going to take my man or something like that. Would I say the effect of that is I struggle in social circles? Probably not. I won't probably go that extreme. I'm probably introverted from that way because it's my sense of comfort and I have control of that. This, to a certain extent, is not comfortable today to, open up and give something away of something that is a part of me. I won't say deeply locked away, but it's very difficult and it's very uncomfortable for people to become vulnerable because of the manipulative manner that ultimately society is. What is your end game by doing it? But for me, it's to give you a sense of getting to know me that much better. I'm going to have people that like me anyway, irrespective of doing this or not. And I think because of the narrative, coming back to it, the facts, there are facts of, yes, you're less likely to succeed because you don't have both parents. But ultimately, that's, on the other hand, that's also not true with, if you have both parents, are they truly around completely? You go back to the generation of my mum, they both were there, but are they truly there? Whereas my mum was there probably every step of the way, from day dot to when I left high school at 19. Was very supportive of every endeavor I wanted to take on, and ultimately that's probably where I want to go full circle and repay the favor of, ultimately, even in business, it's people have thought nothing of it to give support, be it love, kindness, financial support, to be able to make it a success. The sporting one is probably the biggest. I'd probably go back and say, well, what do you think of this, that, or the other, from making transitions from one sport to the other? That in itself, if you don't have the support of family, and I had great support network around me, that's very daunting. And for anybody that's looking to obviously transition with their lifestyle or possibly a career for that matter, it's tough. But I've done it multiple times and I've come out on the winning side, so to speak, been successful. I could have possibly been more successful, but that's just making a mountain out of molehills for the sake of it. It's looking at really something under the microscope, and it need not be. But I think when I look at all the facts of, coming back to it full circle, being brought up by a single parent, having that disability, being told multiple times you can't do that, you won't achieve this, it's not going to be realistic in somebody with your position. I've probably brushed it off like it was, water off on a raincoat. It's like, yeah, that's insignificant. I'll move on and I'll prove you wrong. But not everybody's built like that. I go back to the very beginning of, my grandmother kind of going ballistic as, well, how's he going to be able to cope being in a wheelchair or not being able to walk? That's somebody, that's the generational divide of, 50, 60, 70 years ago. People in my position and anybody with disability, people who watch this, you'd have been isolated, you'd have been shunned away from society, been hidden away. It's still happening in the 21st century in Africa or Asia. People are is looked down as ultimately failure, to the extreme. This person is not quote unquote normal or perfect in terms of they have all their limbs or functioning limbs for that matter. Go away from the disability I have. I've probably rewritten the script and kind of tore it up. It's like, well, my grandmother never said this to me to my face. It was always very positive. Oh, you can do this, you can do that. And I think I've taken it on leaps and bounds as, okay, there's other people that believe in me to be able to be a success. Let me take the bull by the horns and be very creative, very methodical to be able to find a resolution to a problem. I talk of the story of the monkey bars, and this, I don't want to drag this video out too long, but so you get a context of actually the mindset coming into play of ultimately I'd be sitting on the side, very much, being like I talked about with disability being shunned. It wasn't deliberate in this case. It was me probably subjectively, I can't do it right now. Let me sit on the side and be very much stoic in my thinking, but very much an Einstein esque Isaac Newton or Aristotle kind of approach, and kind of, okay, well, this is a problem right here and now. Let me come up with a resolution to be able to do it, and then thus I'm able to partake in regular play with people that I grew up with, and I'm still in contact with ultimately, which is 30 years later. And I think this kind of approach to thinking has served me time and time again to be able to take that, probably step back, take the loss in the short term, but look at it for the long term and be very contradictory to common trends of where we're living at. The entitlement, the quick turnarounds, the quick fixes. Ultimately, I don't want that, because I don't want a quick hit, cocaine kind of make me good for a momentary fix. I'd rather have a buzz for a long time, and it's a buzz that happens over and over again. I think people have probably lost sight of that, and I think that all stems back from the cause and effect of ultimately being brought up in the environment that I've been. It's looking at the long term effects of anything that affects you, because there's always light at the tunnel. Disability, yes, it's held me back, but I've always looked to, okay, can't do it this way, must be I find out multiple examples of ways in which I can do that, and I've looked to teach people that all along. So it's my takeaway from this video, and I know it's going to be a long one, so I appreciate everybody who gets it get to the end. This is what are the actual facts, and then what's the cause and effect then after that. Because if I was to look at it at the narrative of where we are in the ultimately 21st century, and I was born in the 20th century, this could have held me back of, circumstances of being brought up by a single parent, the disability of, we must wrap somebody in cotton wool. And I was actually surprised to hear that when Mum told me my grandma was like that. I never got the gist of that for the 15, 16 years that I knew her. Never sniffed that one bit, that she was probably worried to death that, well, how's he going to get by? So ultimately, you want your story, you want your narrative. Try and dig away at the facts. Those are what truly happened. And then ultimately, use the effects from that and not from the story, because ultimately the story, if it's negative, you know where I'm going to go with that, the effects are going to be negative. If they use the facts, there's going to be some good and there's going to be some bad. I'm not disputing that, but you're able to ultimately deal with it better, and ultimately, yes, I probably used the easiest one for this story, but there's aspects of it where they could have held me back, but they didn't. So that's been my story that's affected me. Hope you've enjoyed it. Hopefully you can take something from it and be able to implement it into your life as well, and look at your story or narrative that like your life is, and be able to look at it under a microscope and see between what is fiction and non-fiction. So that's been obviously this video. Hope you enjoyed it, and speak to you very soon. All the best.